You are here for a reason. You are not an accident, nor are you a mere product of chance. Every detail of your life, every challenge you face, every moment you experience is part of a greater plan. But here's the thing. The key to unlocking that plan is to stop worrying and start trusting. You see, the world will try to tell you that you are alone in your struggles, that you have to figure it all out on your own. It will try to convince you that your circumstances define your future, that the weight of your worries is something you must carry alone. But I am here to tell you today that the moment you let go of your worries and place your trust in something greater, that is the moment everything changes. God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, has a plan for you. A plan that is bigger than your circumstances, greater than your fears, and more significant than your past mistakes. His plan is not one of frustration, confusion, or defeat. It is a plan of hope, of purpose, and of fulfillment. And no matter how impossible your situation may seem, you must believe that God is always working on your behalf. You are not meant to carry the weight of worry. Worry will keep you stuck. Worry will cloud your vision, paralyze your faith, and stop you from stepping into the destiny that was created for you before the foundations of the world. When you worry, you focus on the problem. But when you trust, you focus on the solution. And the solution is already here. It is already in motion, and it is already working for you. Look at the world around you. Look at the trees, the sky, the seasons. Everything in creation operates by a divine plan. God does not bring the rain without a purpose. He doesn't let the sun rise without intention. He doesn't allow you to be where you are without a divine plan in place. Your life is no different. Your life is a part of the intricate divine design of God. You may not always understand the path you're walking right now. You may not see the end result or how things will turn out, but the truth is this: trust in God's plan. He will lead you, guide you, and open doors that no man can shut. His plan for you will unfold in ways you cannot even imagine. And when you look back, you will see that every moment, every challenge, and every victory was a part of the greater picture he was painting for you. Consider for a moment the creation of the world. Genesis tells us that God took 6 days to create the earth, each day bringing something into existence: light, land, animals, and finally humanity. But after each creation, God looked at it and said, "It is good." That's how God operates. He doesn't create things randomly. He creates them with purpose, precision, and care. And just as God created the world with purpose, He has created your life with purpose. You are not here simply by chance. You were intentionally designed to be here with a purpose, a plan, and a destiny that only you can fulfill. But often, in the midst of life's challenges and the noise of this world, it can be hard to see that plan. We live in a world where immediate results and instant gratification are often valued more than the long-term process of trusting in God's timing. We are bombarded by messages telling us that we should have everything figured out right now, that we should be successful, wealthy, and secure without delay. The pressures of life often make us feel like we are running out of time or that we have to hustle to secure our future. But here's the truth. God's plan for you is not based on the world's timeline. It's based on His perfect timing. When we look at the life of Joseph, we see an example of someone whose life was deeply impacted by God's plan, even when the circumstances seemed impossible. Joseph, the son of Jacob, was sold into slavery by his own brothers, thrown into prison, and misunderstood by those around him. Yet through all the pain, betrayal, and hardship, God had a plan for Joseph that was greater than he could ever have imagined. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph later tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." What can we learn from Joseph's story? It's that even in the darkest of times, when it seems like everything is falling apart, God's plan is still in motion. Joseph didn't understand why he was going through so much pain, but he trusted that God had a bigger purpose. And in the end, God's plan brought him into a position of power where he could save an entire nation. But here's the question we must ask ourselves. Do we trust God's plan when life doesn't make sense? Do we trust Him when we are facing setbacks, disappointments, or delays? We must remember that God's plan doesn't always align with our own understanding, and it's not always immediate. It requires faith, patience, and trust in the process. Let's take a moment and think about nature. When a seed is planted in the ground, it doesn't sprout overnight. The seed has to go through a process of growth first, underground, where no one can see it, before it eventually breaks through the soil and begins to grow into something beautiful. God's plan for your life is similar. You may feel like you're in a season where nothing is happening. You may feel like you've been waiting, praying, and working, but the results don't seem to show. But just as the seed is growing beneath the surface, God's plan for your life is unfolding in ways that you cannot always see. There is a process that is happening in your life, a divine work being done in you and through you, and it will be revealed at the right time. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times has something you didn't understand at the time turned out to be the best thing for you? How many times have you been able to look back and see how God was working behind the scenes to bring you to the place you are today? Sometimes we have to trust that God is doing something beyond our ability to understand in the moment. His plan is often greater than we can comprehend, and His timing is always perfect. So, stop worrying about the details. You don't have to figure it all out. Trust that God, who created you and knows the number of hairs on your head, has a plan for you. The creator of the universe is not caught off guard by your circumstances. He is not surprised by the challenges you face, and He is never late. The Bible reminds us in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." When you trust in God's plan, you can be at peace knowing that you are in the hands of someone who has a perfect design for your life. God's plan is not only good, it is perfect, and it is unfolding in your life even when you don't see it. Trust in that. You are exactly where you need to be, and His purpose for your life is greater than any setback or obstacle you may face. Let go of the need to control the outcome and trust that the one who created you knows the way. Worry is one of the greatest enemies of our peace, purpose, and progress. It's something we all struggle with from time to time. It's easy to let worry take over our minds, especially when things don't go according to plan or when we face uncertainty. But what we must realize is that worrying about our circumstances does not change them. In fact, it only keeps us trapped in a cycle of fear, doubt, and confusion. The more we focus on our worries, the more they grow, and the less room there is for trust and faith in God's plan for our lives. In the book of Matthew, Jesus speaks directly to the issue of worry. In Matthew 6:25-34, He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Do you not fear them? Have you not governed them?" This passage reveals a profound truth. Worry does not add value to our lives. In fact, it does the opposite. It detracts from our peace and our ability to fully experience God's provision. Jesus is reminding us that God cares for the smallest parts of creation, the birds, the flowers, the grass, and He will care for us, His most beloved creation, with even greater care. Think about it this way. When you worry, you are essentially saying that God isn't enough to handle the situation. You are implying that your challenges are too big for Him, that your struggles are beyond His reach. But the truth is, God is greater than any worry, any fear, or any problem that may come your way. Psalm 55:22 says, "Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken." This is not just a comforting promise, it is a command to trust in God's ability to handle whatever comes our way. When we worry, we hold on to our concerns and try to manage them ourselves. But when we trust, we release those concerns to God and allow him to handle them in his way and his timing. Let's take a look at the example of the Israelites during their journey through the wilderness. After being freed from Egypt, they wandered for years in a barren desert, constantly facing challenges such as hunger, thirst, and the fear of what lay ahead. Despite the miraculous provision of God, manna from heaven, water from rocks, protection from enemies, they continually gave in to worry. They questioned whether God would truly provide for them, and they complained about their circumstances. Yet despite their lack of faith, God never failed to provide for them. He was always there, guiding them, providing for them, and protecting them, even when they didn't trust his plan. You see, worry often stems from a lack of trust in God's faithfulness. We begin to doubt his ability to provide, to protect, or to guide us in the way we should go. We look at the challenges in front of us and think, how will I make it through this? How will I get by? But the truth is, we are not meant to carry the burden of our worries. God didn't create us to live in anxiety or fear. He created us to live in trust, to walk by faith, and to rest in his provision. In real life, worry can sometimes feel like a heavy burden. Think about carrying a backpack filled with bricks. The longer you carry that weight, the more tired and burdened you become. Every step feels harder. Every movement becomes more difficult. This is what worry does to our souls. It weighs us down and keeps us from moving forward in faith. But when we choose to trust God and surrender our worries to him, it's like taking that backpack off and setting it down. The weight is lifted, and we are free to move forward with confidence, knowing that God is carrying the load for us. There are times when we may think, what if things don't work out the way I hope? Or what if I fail? These thoughts are natural, but they don't reflect the truth of who God is. Our fears and doubts will always be there, but we must choose not to let them control us. The Bible encourages us in Philippians 4:6-7 to do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This passage teaches us that instead of worrying, we should bring our concerns to God in prayer. When we do, God promises to replace our anxiety with his peace, a peace that goes beyond what we can understand, a peace that guards our hearts and minds from the grip of worry. Let's ask ourselves today, what is it that we are worrying about? What is taking up space in our minds and hearts? Are we trusting God to handle it, or are we trying to manage it on our own? Worry will never change the outcome, but trusting God will bring us the peace and clarity we need to move forward. When we stop worrying, we create room for God to work in our lives. We allow him to take control, and we step into a place of rest and faith. So, the next time worry begins to creep in, remember that you are not meant to carry that burden. Trust in God's ability to provide, to lead, and to sustain you. Release your cares to him, and let his peace fill your heart. The moment you let go of worry is the moment you make space for trust to grow. And with trust comes the confidence that God's plan for your life will always be far greater than your worries. When we choose to trust God, we are making a conscious decision to shift our focus from our problems to the possibilities that lie before us. Too often, we get caught up in the difficulty of our circumstances and lose sight of the solution that is already in motion. We become so consumed with the how that we forget to trust in the who. But the truth is, when we place our trust in God, we open ourselves to the solutions he has already prepared for us. Think about it this way. When a person is lost, they have two choices. They can panic and keep trying to find their own way out, or they can stop, trust someone who knows the way, and follow their lead. If they choose to trust, They allow someone with the knowledge and experience to guide them, and they are led to safety. The same applies in our walk with God. When we face uncertainty or difficulty, the temptation is to panic and try to figure everything out ourselves. But when we choose to trust God, we stop fighting the process and let Him guide us to the solution. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 3:05, the 6th, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. This is one of the most powerful reminders in Scripture. Trusting God means surrendering our limited understanding and relying on His infinite wisdom. Our human perspective is often limited, but God sees the bigger picture. He understands the complexities of our lives, our hearts, and our future in a way that we never could. Therefore, when we trust Him, we let go of our need to control everything and allow Him to lead us toward the answers we seek. One of the biggest challenges we face when it comes to trusting God is learning to focus on the solution rather than the problem. Too often, we magnify the difficulties we're experiencing, allowing them to overshadow the possibilities that are available to us. When we focus solely on the problem, it becomes all-consuming. Our thoughts become consumed with what-ifs, and we begin to imagine worst-case scenarios. But when we shift our focus to God, we begin to see things differently. We realize that no matter how big the mountain may seem, God is bigger, and He is already working to move it out of the way. It's not that the challenges aren't real, but by trusting in God, we are reminded that He has already prepared the solution. The story of David and Goliath is a perfect example of focusing on the solution rather than the problem. David, a young shepherd boy, was faced with a giant that no one in Israel believed could be defeated. His brothers, King Saul, and even the entire army of Israel saw the giant and focused on the problem. They were paralyzed by fear and doubt. But David, in his trust in God, saw beyond the giant. He understood that God had given him victories over lions and bears in the past, and he believed that God would deliver him from the hand of Goliath as well. David did not focus on how big the giant was, but on how big his God was. He stepped into the battle with faith and a solution-oriented mindset, trusting that God would fight for him. This is the mindset we need to adopt when we face challenges in our own lives. We must stop looking at the problem and start looking at the God who has already made a way. Jesus reminds us in Mark 9:23, everything is possible for one who believes. When we choose to trust in God's power and His ability to make a way, we step out of the limitations of our own understanding and step into the realm of limitless possibilities. What if we stopped worrying about how things would work out and simply trusted that God would work it all together for our good? Consider the analogy of a person planting a seed. When they plant a seed in the ground, they trust that the soil, sunlight, and water will do their part in helping the seed. They don't constantly dig up the soil to see if the seed is sprouting or question whether the process is working. They trust the natural process and wait patiently, knowing that it will eventually bear fruit. Trusting God works in much the same way. When we surrender our worries and anxieties to Him, we can rest in the fact that He is working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see the immediate results. The solution is in motion, even if we can't yet perceive it. The Apostle Paul in Romans 8:28 encourages us with these words, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This is the promise we must hold on to when life doesn't seem to make sense. God is always at work, and He's always working things together for our good, even in the moments when we don't understand what's happening. The solution is not always immediately visible, but by trusting God, we open ourselves up to His perfect plan and timing. In our daily lives, it can be easy to get caught up in the how of our circumstances. How will I solve this problem? How will I make it through this season? But God invites us to focus on the solution, not by our own efforts, but by His power and guidance. Trusting in God allows us to shift from worry to peace, from fear to faith, and from uncertainty to confidence. It's not that the challenges vanish, but our perspective changes. We see with eyes of faith that God is bigger than the obstacles in front of us, and we can rest in His ability to make a way where there seems to be no way. So when life presents its challenges, don't get caught up in the fear or the anxiety of how things will work out. Instead, shift your focus to the God who is always working for your good, the God who has already provided a solution even when you can't yet see it. Trust in His ability, His timing, and His perfect plan for your life. Trust in the process and watch as He leads you to victory. It's easy to believe in the power of God when things are going well, when life is smooth and everything seems aligned. But what about those times when it feels like we are walking through the wilderness, alone, uncertain and unsure of what comes next? What about when we are facing challenges so overwhelming that we question whether God is truly working on our behalf? Here's the truth we need to remember. Even when we don't see it, God is always working for us. God's work on our behalf is not dependent on our understanding or on our ability to perceive it. In fact, the Bible teaches us that God's ways are higher than ours and His thoughts are higher than ours. Isaiah 55:8. This means that even in our moments of doubt, confusion, and hardship, God is still at work orchestrating every detail of our lives with love, wisdom, and purpose. His work is not limited to the moments when we can see it. It's happening all the time, behind the scenes, in ways we may not yet understand. Take the story of Joseph as an example. Joseph's life was filled with ups and downs. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused of a crime and thrown into prison. For years, it seemed like Joseph's life was filled with one setback after another. But despite his difficult circumstances, God was still working for him. In Genesis 39:2, we are told that the Lord was with Joseph. Even when Joseph couldn't see how things would turn out, even when he was locked in a prison cell, God was working on his behalf. God was orchestrating events that would eventually lead Joseph to a position of power where he could save his family and an entire nation from famine. Joseph, in hindsight, would later declare in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." We need to ask ourselves, how often do we look at our circumstances and assume that God isn't working for us simply because we can't see the outcome? How often do we let our limited understanding dictate whether we believe God is active in our lives? Joseph didn't understand the process he was going through, but he trusted that God was always with him, always working behind the scenes. He didn't let his present circumstances define his belief in God's faithfulness. In the same way, we must learn to trust that even when things don't make sense, God is working on our behalf. Think of it like a sculptor working on a statue. From the outside, it may look like the sculptor is simply chipping away at a block of stone, making what seems like random cuts. But every strike of the chisel has a purpose. The sculptor knows the end result, even if the stone doesn't. Similarly, God is chiseling away at our lives, sometimes in ways we don't understand, shaping and refining us into the people He created us to be. We might not see the progress, but that doesn't mean the work isn't happening. God is always at work, even when it feels like we are in a season of waiting or struggle. In our daily lives, it can be hard to recognize that God is working when things aren't going the way we expect or hope. We often want answers and solutions right now. But God's plan doesn't always align with our timeline. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Romans 8:28 that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This means that regardless of what we face, God is always working for our good. Even in moments of pain, loss, or uncertainty, He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating our lives for a greater purpose. Real life often feels like a series of disconnected events, When we're in the middle of a difficult season, it's hard to see how it fits into the bigger picture. But just like a puzzle, every piece has its place. You don't see the full picture until all the pieces are in place. In the same way, we may not understand how each challenge, each moment of hardship fits into God's greater plan, but we can trust that He is working everything together for our good. Another example comes from the life of Esther. When Esther was chosen to be queen, she had no idea that God had placed her in that position for such a time as this, to save her people from destruction. Esther went through a period of uncertainty, fear, and decision-making, not knowing what the outcome would be, but God was working behind the scenes, positioning her exactly where she needed to be at the right time. Even when she couldn't see God's hand at work, it was there, guiding her every step of the way. When we trust that God is always working for us, even when we can't see it, we begin to realize that He is orchestrating our lives in ways we might not yet understand. The key to trusting that God is always working on our behalf is understanding that His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match our own. We are often impatient, wanting things to happen on our schedule, but God's plan unfolds in His time, not ours. The Israelites, for example, were waiting for God to deliver them from slavery in Egypt. They had to endure years of oppression and suffering before God made a way for their freedom. Yet, in the midst of their struggles, God was at work. When they were ready to leave Egypt, God parted the Red Sea and led them to freedom in a miraculous way. He didn't forget about them, even when they couldn't see Him working. We may not understand the purpose of our struggles, but God's promise is clear. He is always at work for our good. We must hold on to that truth, knowing that He is guiding us, even when it feels like we're walking in the dark. His ways are higher. His timing is perfect. And His work is always for our ultimate good. Even in the most challenging moments, we can rest assured that God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for what lies ahead. When we choose to trust God, we must also acknowledge that His plan for us is far greater than anything we could have imagined for ourselves. Often we limit God's work in our lives by trying to fit His will into our narrow understanding of what we think is best. But God's ways are not our ways, and His plans are not bound by our limited human perspective. In the book of Isaiah 55:8-9, God declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." This means that God's plan for our lives is not confined to our expectations or understanding. We must trust that even when it doesn't make sense to us, God's plan is always better. Imagine a child who is given a gift but doesn't fully understand the value of it because of their limited perspective. The child might look at the gift and think it's not what they wanted or expected. They might even push it aside in favor of something else. But the parent knows the value of the gift and understands that is precisely what the child needs, even if the child doesn't yet see it. This is how it works with God. Sometimes what we think we want is not what we truly need. And it's only by trusting God that we can begin to see how His plan is working for our good, even when it's not immediately clear. Take the example of the Apostle Paul. Before he became a follower of Christ, he was known as Saul, a man who persecuted Christians and sought to destroy the early church. His plan for his life was to rise to power in Judaism, to be a respected leader among his people. But God had a different plan for Paul. On the road to Damascus, Paul was struck by a divine light and blinded for 3 days. His life was radically changed when he encountered Jesus, and his new mission became to spread the gospel and build the very church he had once sought to destroy. Paul's life and his mission were far greater than anything he could have imagined before his encounter with Christ. If he had stuck to his own plan, he would have missed out on the incredible purpose God had for him. The same is true for us. When we place our trust in God, we surrender our own plans and desires and open ourselves up to His greater purpose. It's natural for us to hold on to what we think we want, to cling to our own ideas of success and happiness. But we must ask ourselves, what if God's idea of success is different from ours? What if His vision for our lives is far more expansive and fulfilling than anything we could have dreamed for ourselves? Are we willing to let go of our own plans and trust in the greater purpose God has in store? In real life, this is often a difficult thing to do. We live in a world that values control, success, and certainty. We are taught to make our own way, to plan our own future, and to achieve our own dreams. But trusting God requires us to let go of that control and embrace the unknown. It requires us to believe that God's plan for us is better than anything we could have planned on our own. It's like planting a seed in the ground. The seed doesn't know what's going to happen next. It doesn't know how or when it will grow, but it trusts that if it's planted in the right soil, it will produce something beautiful. In the same way, we may not know exactly how God's plan for our lives will unfold, but we can trust that it will bring about a harvest greater than we could have imagined. Consider the life of Abraham. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. Yet for years, Abraham and his wife Sarah were childless. In their old age, they struggled to believe that God's promise would come to pass. But despite their doubts, God was faithful. When Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, God gave them the son Isaac, through whom the promise was fulfilled. God's plan for Abraham was far greater than Abraham could have imagined. He didn't just become the father of a child, he became the father of nations, through whom God's blessings would be passed down to future generations. Abraham had to trust that God's timing was perfect, even when it seemed impossible. This is the same faith that we must embrace when we don't understand why certain things haven't come to pass in our lives yet. It's easy to become discouraged when things don't happen according to our own schedule, but we must trust that God's timing is always perfect. Psalm 31:15 reminds us, "My times are in your hands." God knows exactly when to open the doors, when to move us forward, and when to hold us back. His plan is not constrained by our timelines, but by His divine wisdom and understanding. There will be seasons in our lives when things don't make sense, when we don't understand why certain doors are closed or why our plans are interrupted. But we must remember that God's plan is always greater than ours. Sometimes God is protecting us from something we cannot see. Sometimes He is teaching us patience or refining our character. And sometimes He is simply preparing us for something bigger than we can imagine. Trusting God means believing that He is working all things together for our good, even when we can't see the end result. In Matthew 7:9-11, Jesus says, "Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask Him?" This passage reminds us that God knows how to give us what is good. Even when we don't understand the details, we can trust that God's plan is always for our ultimate good and His glory. So, as we trust God, let's not limit His plan for our lives by our own expectations. Let go of your need to control and trust that God is leading you to a place of greater purpose and fulfillment. Even when things don't make sense, know that God's plan for your life is far greater than anything you could have imagined. Trust that He is working for your good, and that in His time, you will see His perfect plan unfold in ways you never thought possible. One of the most profound truths we can embrace when it comes to trusting God is that trusting Him means surrendering to His will, even when it leads us down unexpected paths. We often find ourselves holding tightly to our own plans, desires, and comfort zones. But the reality is that trust in God demands that we release our grip on the things we think we need and open ourselves up to His perfect plan, even when it challenges us. Trusting God often requires us to go through the process of surrender. Consider the example of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. In Matthew 26:39, Jesus prays, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Here, we see the Son of God fully aware of the suffering he was about to endure, wrestling with his own will. But at the end of the prayer, he surrenders his desires to the will of his Father. He trusts that the path ahead, though painful, is part of a greater purpose, the salvation of humanity. Jesus' act of surrender was not an easy one, but it was necessary. He knew that true trust in his Father meant submitting to his will, even when it wasn't comfortable or easy. This is a powerful example for us. There are times in our lives when God's will doesn't align with our own plans. Perhaps we face a change that feels uncomfortable, a loss that we never saw coming, or a season of waiting that tests our patience. But trusting God means surrendering our desires, preferences, and understanding to Him, knowing that He is sovereign and His plan is better than anything we could create for ourselves. It's in these moments of surrender that we find true peace and purpose. Consider the story of Abraham and Isaac. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, yet he asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, the child through whom the promise was supposed to be fulfilled. In Genesis 22, we see Abraham's willingness to surrender his most precious gift, his son, to God's will. He didn't understand the reasoning behind God's command, but he trusted that God knew best. As Abraham raised the knife to sacrifice Isaac, God stopped him and provided a ram as a substitute. Through this act of obedience and trust, Abraham's faith was refined, and God reaffirmed his promise to him. Abraham's story challenges us to ask ourselves, what are we holding on to that we are unwilling to surrender to God? Is there an area of our life where we are holding tightly to our own will and not fully trusting God with the outcome? God may ask us to let go of things we value deeply, whether that's our career, a relationship, our plans for the future, or even our sense of control. But when we surrender, we open ourselves to a deeper relationship with God and to the fulfillment of His perfect will in our lives. The process of surrender is often uncomfortable, but it's in these moments that God is able to mold and shape us into the people He created us to be. Just like a potter shapes clay on a wheel, God works in us when we allow Him to mold our hearts. The clay doesn't resist the potter's hand. It submits to the process. We too must trust that God is shaping us for something greater than we could have imagined. Surrendering our will to God doesn't mean we give up on our dreams or stop making plans. It means that we invite God into those plans, trusting that He knows what's best for us. Proverbs 16:9 reminds us, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. God allows us to make plans, but we must always acknowledge that He is the one who establishes the way. When we trust that God's way is better, we allow Him to direct our steps, even when the path seems uncertain. Think about a GPS system in a car. The GPS will guide you to your destination, but it may take you on a route that you didn't expect, or even reroute you if there's a detour. You may not always understand why the GPS is taking you a particular way, but you trust that it knows the best route to your destination. In the same way, we must trust God's guidance even when it takes us through roads we didn't anticipate. There may be detours or delays along the way, but God is always leading us toward His ultimate purpose for our lives. The act of surrender also requires patience. Sometimes the waiting period is the hardest part of trust. We want immediate answers, immediate solutions, and immediate results. But trusting God means allowing Him to work in His own time. There are times when we won't have all the answers right away, and there are seasons when we will have to wait on God's timing. But Psalm 27:14 encourages us. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. In our waiting, God is preparing us, refining us, and making us ready for what He has in store. Surrendering our will doesn't mean we stop being active or passive in our faith. It means that we actively submit our plans to God, seeking His direction, trusting His wisdom, and allowing Him to lead us in the way that is best. As we trust God more deeply, we can rest assured that His purpose will unfold in our lives, even if it's different from what we had envisioned. Real life is full of decisions, some big and some small. And in each of these decisions, we have a choice. We can trust God and surrender to His will, or we can try to go our own way. The more we learn to surrender our desires, plans, and dreams to God, the more we will experience the peace that comes from trusting Him. Surrender isn't about giving up. It's about letting go of control and allowing God to lead us into His perfect plan. So let us ask ourselves, are we ready to fully trust God with every area of our lives? Are we willing to surrender our own will and submit to His? When we do, we will experience a peace and confidence that only comes from knowing that we are in the hands of a loving and sovereign God who knows what's best for us. Trusting God means surrendering our plans to His, and in doing so, we align ourselves with His perfect will for our lives. As we come to the end of this message, I want to remind you that trusting God is not just a one-time decision, it's a daily choice. It requires faith, patience, surrender, and a deep belief that God has a plan for your life, far greater than anything you could have imagined for yourself. Through the challenges, uncertainties, and waiting periods, remember that God is always at work, guiding, shaping, and refining you for a greater purpose. His timing is perfect, His plan is good, and His love for you is unshakable. As you step forward from this moment, I encourage you to trust God with every part of your life, your dreams, your fears, your hopes, and your uncertainties. Let go of your need for control and surrender your will to His. Know that as you trust Him, He will lead you into a future full of purpose, fulfillment, and peace. Good luck on this journey of trust, and may you always find comfort in knowing that you are never alone. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and may God bless you as you continue to walk in His faithfulness.